Greetings, everyone. I'm here today with the Celtic Feminine podcast with my very special guest, Mary Mc Laughlin. If you've been following my work and or my podcast for a while, you'll know maybe I've been a bit quieter in the past couple of years as far as online content. However, I've been more active in public speaking where I'm located, not too far from the Quebec and Vermont border. And of course, Anthony Murphy joined us last month, which was really wonderful. But I'm glad to be back here at the podcast and glad to be continuing to contribute to content where the streams of folklore, women's studies, ethnomusicology, and Celtic spirituality meet. So you can find more at the CelticFemininePodcast.com or finding us on YouTube and the major hosting platforms out there, Apple, Spotify, and so many others. By the way, I started this YouTube channel and I only have like 12 subscribers. I had this podcast for a number of years, but then finally added it to YouTube. So if anybody would like to subscribe, that would be amazing and bring that number up so it looks a little better. But so Mary McLaughlin, she is a singer, songwriter, teacher who is steeped in the Ulster Gaelic song tradition of her native Ireland, where she was born and raised. Mary records, performs, and teaches workshops in Irish singing, technique, Gaelic song, and culture. She's toured extensively throughout the UK, Ireland, North America, teaching and performing at Celtic and Irish camps. She has recorded 5 CDs to international acclaim, written 2 songbooks, and completed a PhD in Irish Otherworld Song. Her particular expertise is in the Keen, Gaelic Christmas songs, and fairy song. Currently, she teaches Gaelic song in the Ulster tradition online to students from several countries through classes and individual lessons. Well, I'm so pleased to have you here today, Mary. Welcome, welcome.
Thank you.
It was so wonderful to meet you when we were both studying at the University of Limerick at the Irish World of Academy of Music and Dance, where I was studying ethnomusicology for my master's, and you were in the ritual song and chant program. And we really connected over our mutual love for Bridget. And, it was just wonderful. There's I think, some synchronicities there when we met and we talked and connected. And it's wonderful now. Today, we're recording on May 1st, which is we have May Day, Bealtaine, which is wonderful. And Mary and I actually had a chance to go to Solus Breed and visit the center where the Brigidine sisters are. And we had a beautiful May Day time there with the sisters. And Mary, I believe you were singing at that location, which was so nice. And May Day also is known as a time where the fairies come out. And could you tell us a little bit about May Day and the fairies? And since you've done so much research here about fairies and things, so I'd love to hear about it.
Sure. Well, first of all, thanks for inviting me, and I wish you all the best with getting lots and lots of subscribers.
Thank you.
um, so it's a treat to see you again after quite a long time.
Yes.
Um, so Beltane or Bealtaine, as we call it, is a big, big fire festival, and in the Celtic year, there are 8 festivals. There are the solstices, equinoxes, and then 4 fire festivals. And they each sort of take up a slice of the pie, if you like, of the Celtic year when it's a circle. And Beltane is literally opposite Samhain. The 1st of May is a kind of rough estimate of when it actually happens because the way that the fire festivals are plotted or were plotted are exactly halfway between equinox and solstice. And because of the shifting of the earth and because of the changing of the calendars, we're on the 3rd major calendar, we're in the Gregorian calendar.
Hmm.
Um, the Julian calendar, which was before this one, chopped off 11 days in the year, which completely tilted everything, and that was in sort of late medieval times. So, roughly speaking, the fire festivals happen within a 5 day 5 day sort of stretch from the first. So it's more likely that true Beltane is the third or the fourth, probably about the
Mm.
fourth. But still, we still sort of think of the first. And I have to say, it is funny because, as I was just saying to you, Amy, the sun has come out for the first time in months. And we haven't had to put on central heating for the first time in three months. So it's kind of interesting that, it's all kind of coming together. And May Day was really about the celebration, the entry into summer. That's
Mm.
what it was about. That's what the festival was originally about. And it was also a community fire festival. All the fire festivals were gatherings where people would come back, families would gather, a bit like in the States, Thanksgiving, where everybody gathers, the family travels to be together. And so these ancient festivals were like that. Um, Yellow is very, very much the color of Beltane because this is the time when all the yellow flowers come out. We've got dandelions and daisies and primroses, and we've just had the daffodils. They're just kind of fading. So it's a very yellow festival. And that was very important because people would put flowers around their houses for protection. 1st of May, or Bealtaine, is considered a fairly dangerous festival in some ways because that's a time when there's sort of free license, and so the fairies in particular might be just being at their most mischievous, and they would come out and steal the milk, or they would change the milk in the churn, and that would be pretty disastrous, because people were dependent on milk and milk products in order to live. Now this is going back thousands of years, so there was a custom of putting yellow flowers out to kind of keep them at bay for some reason. Um, but there was also uh, a custom of putting specific tree branches around the house. And those were uh, holly, um, rowan, ash, elder, and there's another one will come back to me. And they were put around the house as protection against the fairies. And even, they'd be put on, if they were lucky to have a shed for the cows, and then it'd be put on that or the byre. It was all about keeping the fairies at bay because they would do damage. I've also heard of people tying rowan and maybe some other plants to the
Yeah.
tails of cows to protect them. So there's this very strong emphasis on protection happening at this time. It's also a fertility festival, and there would be lots of wild goings on going on in the hills. And so, one of the things that would happen is that people would gather the branches that they'd had for the year and bring them up on the hill and throw them into the fire. So they
Mm.
were saying goodbye to that part of the year, and now they're welcoming in new ones. Um, Another thing that would happen, it's the time where the cows were driven up from the pasture, and they would be driven up higher because they would have been brought down at Samhain and sheltered, and now they
Mm.
went to the open pasture. Um, There's an interesting, I don't know if you recall the wonderful Sean O'Dinn. We went to, I remember you and I went to one of his talks. Unfortunately, Sean passed away just about 3 years ago.
Yes.
Um, but he was an expert in folklore, and he talked about the correlation between the moving of the cows to the Pleiades, the seven sisters in
Mm.
the sky, the astronomical correlation, and how as the Pleiades came down, the Bulia, the herd, went up, and then the opposite happened 6 months later. The
Mm.
Pleiades went up, and the herd came down. And I thought that was a really lovely way of thinking about it. Um,
Oh.
on on the festivals, which would be, as I say, fire festivals on the tops of hills, they would do things like run the cows between two fires, and that was very physical. It was about getting rid of insects, lice, different parasites that might have settled in the cows over the winter. Um, Also, there was a habit of women who were pregnant jumping over the fires. Now, I don't know what that was about, but they
Mm,
believed it was going to bring them a safe birth. So there's
yeah.
all these different traditions in Bealtaine. And there's a song that I teach. I'll sing you a little bit of it, and it's about this time of year. It's the only one that's, well, there's two versions. There's a Donegal version and a Munster version. I'm going to sing the Munster version, but it's about this time of year, and it's the only one that really lays out some of these traditions.
Mm,
And it's extremely old. There's a bit of an argy-bargy, as there often is, about dating, but it's either 1600 or 1700. So we're
wow.
talking pretty old, because most of the songs have either got lost or absorbed and changed. But this one is called Hugamarhain and Sarulin, which means we brought in the summer, and it refers to that tradition of gathering those branches, the protective branches,
Ah,
bringing them around the townland, from home to home, especially for people who are maybe elder or maybe disabled or whatever, and they weren't able to get out into the woods to gather. So the youngsters would do it, the teens would do it, and they would bring these all around. And this song, basically, the words of the chorus are "Summer, summer, milk of the cows." That's the first. That's the first line. Shows how important the cows were. And then we brought the summer with us. That's the sort of the catch line that goes right through the refrain. We brought
oh,
the summer in with us, which is referring to them bringing the branches. And then beautiful girls uphill and going into the leafy, uphill, down dale, going into the leafy woods, picking these branches, bringing them around to different homes, distributing them, and then the larks singing and the cuckoos singing, and everything is just bursting out into summer. So that's what the song's about. I'll sing you a bit of it. Saru saru banyananyana hagamar hainan sarulin saru winan no in inglega hagamar hainan sarulin babog na bialtanam mai janam tari Suas crack is she's glan Kayani mashaka galgaraglesa Hagamar heinam sarulin Saru saru banyananyana Hagamar heinam sarulin Saru violina grenya Hagamar Hainam Sarulin. And it goes on and on for several
oh,
verses.
beautiful.
And that last little chorus was Sourby yellow summer since the Lena Grania, since the sunset, because all of these festivals ran from uh, dusk to dusk, not
Mm,
dawn to dusk. So
wow.
that's a little sort of introduction to Bealtaine from my perspective.
I love that. Now, do you know any other titles of songs for May Day? I used to be a Waldorf music teacher, and we had a
Mhm.
set number of these sort of May Day songs that sort of in the Waldorf kind of Steiner tradition were kind of collected and kind of passed. Sometimes people would make copies and packets and things like that. Sometimes people would, just handwrite them out, which is really interesting. And when I look them up online, there's not really that much of a mention of them. But anyway, in your tradition in your own research, do you have any other May Day songs that you know about?
Well, it's interesting because they are pretty hard to find. Um,
Mm.
and now the one that I know from Donegal is quite similar
Hmm.
to the one that I've just sung. It's got the same. It's got a slightly different tune, and it also refers to the animals coming out, like the hare coming out and the grey heron coming out, and that sort of a thing. That's in Gaelic. But there's a lovely little one that I learned was from it's from the 1800s, early 1800s, and it's called The Fairy King's Courtship,
Ah.
and it's in English.
Hmm.
sing you a little
Wow.
bit of it.
Sure.
On the first day of May, at the close of the day, as I stood in the shade of a green spreading tree, a young lover courting a maiden I spied. I drew very nigh them to hear and to see. The dress that he wore was a velvet so green, all trimmed with gold lace and as bright as the sea. And he said, "Love, I'll make you my own fairy queen, if you are but willing to go with me. Lisses and forts shall be at your command, mountains and valleys, the land and the sea, and the billows that roar along the seashore, if you are but willing to go with me." And it goes on for many verses. And she says, "Well, I don't think that I could be a good queen. I'm very lowly birth." And he says, "Oh, I don't care. And I'm the king of the fairies of the north, John McEnanty, the Ulster king of the fairies. And I'm determined to make you my queen." And so the song goes on. But in actual fact, it ends up just her just saying no. And him saying, "You don't know how hard I've traveled and looked for you." I mean, the last verse goes something like this. It's many a mile I have roamed in my time, by sea and by land, a looking for thee, and I never could find rest or peace for my mind, until fortune proved kind and sent you to me. But we don't know if she went with him.
Wow.
It's a great little song. It's very unusual.
That's beautiful.
Yeah.
That song, so it discusses like the timing of May Day, and
Yeah.
now if traditionally, so if it was May 1st, and would they celebrate it on May 1st, or would they go with the astronomical?
Yeah, this song was made, but I mean, remember this song was written in the 1800s. That was after the Julian calendar.
Ah,
So,
right. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
when we're going back, the very first calendar, the colony calendar, was an agricultural calendar, and that was
Right.
pre-Christian.
Mm-hmm.
And so we don't know. These traditions go back
Right.
until that time, earlier than that time, because it was
Mm-hmm.
the way people gathered, and people need ritual.
Yes.
People need form. They need form in their life. They need something to hang on to. They need repetition. Like in the Western world, there's Christmas, for example, over in these islands, which is very strong. There's Easter.
Mm,
Even though the date moves about, it's still a ritual time. And in other religions there are specific. There's Ramadan. There's all these different times that where certain things happen and certain things are important and are amplified. So our forefathers are no different.
mm-hmm.
They needed that too. I mean, you know that. You know this stuff,
Right.
Amy.
Wow. Yeah. And May 1st, say they're following the calendar, the Julian calendar, May 1st, if they're celebrating at that day, would they be you're saying it's going from dawn till dusk. So it would be at May 1st that it would be
It would begin the
from
night before,
right.
always the night before.
Okay,
So
the
that's
eve
why, for
of.
example, yeah, and this is the Gregorian calendar now. The Julian calendar was when they changed it.
Oh,
The
right, right.
Gregorian calendar was from about 1600.
Mm-hmm.
Um, like the festival of Bealtaine is a festival of hope and of joy and of just just fun. That there was it's a very light festival in so many ways, and the opposite of that is the festival of Samhain, which is deep and dark and about death.
Right.
Beltaine's about life, Samhain's about death. It's that type of a balance. So Ichahauna, which is the night before Samhain,
Mm,
when they would have begun that festival. But of course, it had begun much earlier because it's dark by 5 o'clock in
mm-hmm.
November, into November. Whereas now it's dark by about 8:30 p.m. over in Ireland. So
Yes.
It really depended. I mean, and then of course they were all uh, sort of what's the word? They were all sort of grabbed by the Christian church
Yeah.
and changed.
Hmm.
And so Samhain became Halloween, Iha Samhain became Hallow Eve, that sort of a thing. So Halloween have been correlated to the beginning of the festival of Samhain.
Yes.
And it's much more about the fairies than anything, actually, because
Hmm.
any of the other festivals and a lot of the traditions of Halloween come out of Samhain.
Hmm.
So, for example, the wearing of masks. It was believed that the fairies were really abroad in a big way in Samhain, and they were particularly looking for handsome young men.
Ah.
Those masks were worn so that they wouldn't be recognized as handsome young men. That was one of the uh, beliefs about the masks. The trick or treat, sort of a similar thing. The fairies were going to be out and playing mischief. So we're going to do it quickly, and either you can have a trick or a treat, which means that if you give us the treat, then we'll let you off the trick. But
Mm.
if you don't, then we'll do something, a little bit naughty, maybe unhinge your gate or pull out your plants or something like that.
Yeah.
Because there was a belief the fairies were going to do it anyway. So there's this again, this very ancient custom of mimicking uh, the gods or whoever were in the place of the gods. And in Ireland, the fairy faith was so strong; it was as good as having a set of gods, really. Although it was
Mm.
much more mysterious, you
Right.
know, certain names. So it was kind of unusual to get that song that I mentioned to you. I've
Hmm.
heard of the name of King of the Ulster now, John McAnanty, and then Finbar, I think, was the king in Munster.
Hmm.
But generally speaking, they're not named. So something much, much more ethereal about it. But there was the same kind of attitudes as you would get with gods in other religions, a mixture of awe and fear
Hmm.
and a sense of um, being careful. Um, so that was sort of more prevalent at Samhain than it is at Bealtaine.
Hmm.
The big one at Bealtaine was about the stealing of the milk. So,
Ah, yes.
yeah.
Now, okay, to continue with the fairies, sometimes there's an association with certain times of the year and maybe young women and older women. And then Samhain, often people think of the old hag and things like that. But the fairies themselves, are they sort of perpetually young? Um, are there any stories about older ones, you know, or they're just yeah, they're just always in
Well,
the
yeah,
same state?
no, 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 they're all ages. I mean, the banshee means
Ah,
women of the fairy,
ah,
women of the she. She's a specific kind of fairy, and she is always depicted as an old woman, usually in a black shawl, and very much connected to the Irish king.
hmm,
We get her mixed up because the keening woman traditionally is called the banquincha, which
ah,
means the keening woman, but people mix that up with the banshee. So there's a lot of crossover there. Um,
ah,
and so she's definitely an older woman.
mm-hmm.
And you get fairy reports of, you know, um, all sorts of shapes, sizes, and there are many classes of fairies too. The best book to read, I believe, on the fairies is by Evans Wentz, Walter Yealing Evans Wentz. I don't know if you come across it, Amy.
I think
It's
that sounds familiar. Yeah, that the surname there sounds
like a
familiar. Once.
tome. It's
Whoa.
about 500-600 pages long.
Wow.
And
Great
this
resource.
young man, Walter Yealing Evans Wentz, was born in the States, but his mother was, I think it was his mother was Welsh. I think that was it, but I'm not sure.
Hmm.
It was either his mother or his father. And he became fascinated by all things Celtic. And so he
Yes.
came across to the British Islands and the name of it, and he wrote a PhD. And this PhD was published as the book, which is called The Fairy Faith in Celtic Countries.
Hmm.
Evans Wentz went on to translate the Tibetan Book of the Dead into English. So he
Wow.
was a very brilliant scholar.
Hmm.
And he was just about 25 when he did this year going round literally the six Celtic countries of Scotland, Ireland, Wales, Isle of Man, Cornwall, and Brittany over in
Yes.
France. was going around them, and he was interviewing people. And the first section of the book is just reporting what people say. And he interviewed farmers, and he interviewed um, people who were psychic, and he interviewed
Mm.
people who were religious and people who weren't religious. And I mean, it's fabulous. And so there's report after report after report. And his question was about the fairy faith. And then the rest of the book is all his analysis and aligning it to um, other both to history and also to other nations and also to possibility even of outer space. And that was written in 1909.
Wow. That sounds like an incredible resource.
Amazing book. It's an
Wow.
amazing book. I recommend it to anybody who's seriously interested. Now, it's not easy to read. I mean,
Mm.
I wouldn't say I've read all of it. I use it as a reference book,
Hmm.
but it's gripping once you get into it. It's just very, very impressive. There's a lot of stuff out there. There's a lot of good books out there. Another great one is called The Good People,
Ah.
which is from 1990, and that was a
Hmm.
collection of essays by Peter Narvaez. And those stories or those essays are all from different parts again of uh, of the Celtic countries, but predominantly Ireland and Scotland. But there's
Yes.
actually I think there's even one from Newfoundland
Ah.
in the good people, but over
Wow.
with the Scots, you know.
That would be
Uh,
interesting.
but
Yeah.
it's a great book. They're called The Good People. So I mean, there's some really good material out there.
Hmm.
There's a lot of fluff as well, you know, but those two
Yeah.
are very solid books, you know,
That's
unreadable.
fantastic.
Yeah.
Yeah. And you were mentioning Samhain before, and it's interesting, the things that we kind of think about on a day-to-day basis, and little things that come into our head, and things that little whispers like, I remember, for some reason, I keep thinking about you. And it reminded me of my interview with Dolores Whelan. And it was that when I had my interview with her, that was the day that Shauna Dunn had passed away, believe it or
Ah,
not. So, if for anybody just tuning in now, Shauna is a monk at the Glenstall Abbey in Ireland, and just fantastic. And he was very honest. And okay, so it sounds like we were both at that event for Shauna did a talk in Limerick City on Samhain, and he was very honest about what things were taken from the older pre-Christian and kind of assimilated into Christianity. And he's written many books about it. And whenever I speak, I usually mention his book about Bridget. That was pivotal for me when I first got into Bridget. So it was just that, yeah. So we had that event that we went to, and we heard, and that lecture was just fantastic. So that, and then of course that now too, May Day, the exact opposite of time of the year. So yeah, it's fantastic to think about,
yeah, yeah, and it's really interesting because I actually came across a copy of the letter, the original letter that was sent out from Rome in, I think it was the 600s, the 7th century, saying, "Take, do not take them from their places of worship. Do not take them from their holy wells or from their hills or from the icons that they worship. Just
Wow.
gradually replace their icons with our icons." It was a complete strategy to
So
take
you
them,
have the exact letter. There's actually a
not the
letter.
exact copy of it, not the exact letter, but yeah, I have
Ah,
a copy of that letter. Um, it was published in, I can't remember where it was
yeah.
published, but anyway, I got hold of it. It's online somewhere.
Oh,
Most things are online somewhere. And it
yeah.
was the letter from, I think it was Gregory to Augustus in England, who was a
Wow.
priest, and these were the instructions, and it was very, very, and in fact, Shauna quotes from it in
Ah.
The Awesome Mystery. He quotes from the same letter. So it was an absolute strategy of change.
Mm.
So, for example, people say to me, "My goodness, look at all the Patrick and Bridget wells." I said, "Well, it wasn't like Patrick and Bridget were marathon walkers, you know. Lots of these wells were local wells to
Yeah.
local gods and goddesses, and they were renamed because
Mm-hmm.
Patrick and Bridget were sort of hijacked into the Christian church.
Mm. Yeah.
Bridget being the interesting one, but you know much more about Bridget than anybody else I know. But
Oh,
but she being the interesting one with the two Bridgets, and
yeah.
and I'm sure you're aware that Ireland has only just made a public holiday
Mm-hmm.
last year, 2023, the first time for Bridget, and
Yeah.
so it's like you've got a choice which one you go with, the Goddess Bridget or the Saint Bridget, you know.
Yeah, exactly. And I love that when I was talking to Anthony Murphy, we talked about this sort of a gray area between, not quite Christian and not quite pagan. It's somewhere in this gray area, I think, where awe exists, where we can be reverent and we can have awe and wonder about nature and stories and mythology and faith, and it doesn't have to be dogmatic one way or another, which is a beautiful thing. Do you find that in your own maybe spirituality and things that you connect with, that
Yeah,
it's a
yeah. I mean,
gray area?
yeah, I absolutely, and I believe that that's what that area is called, Celtic Christianity.
Mm,
Um, John O'Donoghue wrote quite a bit about it, um, and to me, it's holding the two truths simultaneously,
yeah.
rather than feeling that they have to be in opposition.
Hmm.
And there's a lovely passage in the Good People, actually, with Margaret Bennett, who's a wonderful singer, wonderful Scottish singer, but also a folklorist. And she was interviewing an older woman in Scotland who was probably in her 80s, mid to late 80s. And the vicar had come around, or the reverend, I think it was a vicar, had come around and saying to her, why do you believe in these fairies? Why do you always go on about
Mm.
these fairies? It's complete nonsense. Why can't you just, you know, believe in God? I mean, you've never even seen a fairy. And
Yeah.
she turned to him and said, have you ever seen God?
Hmm.
Pretty powerful, turning it
Hmm.
round
Yeah.
like that. And then she went on to say, I have no problem with both. To me,
Yeah.
I'm quite happy to have a Christian God. I'm quite happy to have the fairies at the bottom of my garden who I talk to. I am quite happy to have both. And so I think that's probably the grey area you mean. That's sort of
Yeah.
it's all okay. And
Feels
it's
like there's a
really
freedom there,
it's freedom, exactly.
Yeah.
And there's an inclusiveness too, like that,
Yeah.
everybody can get in there. I mean, the fairies are really connected to nature. Now, in Evans Wentz's book, he has, as I said, different classes, and he
Mm.
describes them. But you're always going to meet them in nature. You're not going to meet them in a dance hall, you're going to meet them in
Right.
nature, because that's their abode.
Hmm.
And of course, that goes back to the Tuatha Danann and all of those legends. There's so many there, that um, where the fairies come from. And it's fascinating to think about the different levels that there are of fairy, and they all have slightly different agendas. And
Mm.
that's another thing that I remember, again, when we were both at the university together. One of my special projects was about fairy lore. That's
Yeah.
how I got into the PhD. Um, but I remember writing this essay called "Are the Fairies Good or Bad?" And I come up with the conclusion that, of course, neither.
Mm.
But it's like saying, is a lion good or bad? Is a wolf good or bad? They are of their own nature, and within that nature they will perform. And so it's the same with fairies, that they are of their own nature. And
Mm.
um, if they want to make themselves known to you, they will. And if you try to crash into them or try to crash into their abodes, they will make you feel it. So it's that sort of a thing. So I think that consciousness is very, very prevalent in certainly older Ireland. I hesitate to talk about modern Ireland, because modern Ireland has only been modern for 20 to 30 years, whereas
Yeah.
older Ireland was older for
Right.
thousands and thousands of years. So, that there's a lot of new influences that have come into the island of Ireland in the last 20 years, which are changing and have changed it. I would say 30 years, actually. I'd say from the 90s. Um, and so Ireland has changed a lot. So what I'm talking about is older. However, I don't know if you've come across uh, um, what's his name, Mannequin,
Mm.
Magus Mannequin.
Sounds familiar.
and he's from Cork, and
Hmm.
he's a journalist. And a very interesting man, got loads and loads of experience with folklore. But he did this wonderful survey, and as recently, I think it was 2014 or 15, very recently. Um, because he said the way he introduced it was he said he went to the bank manager to talk about increasing his mortgage
Hmm.
so that he could build a shed down the back of his garden. The bank manager said to him, "Hope there are no fairies there." And that made him think, the bank manager saying that, what is the status of fairies today? And so he
Wow.
sent out letters to all the institutions about, what do you think of the fairy faith? That sort of thing. And the answers he got, well, he didn't, not everybody answered, but the answers he got could be very hilarious. I mean, like, for example, the Arts Council wrote back and said, we haven't actually had any applications from other world beings, but we will be fair and equitable with them if they do apply for a grant, things like that. So some very funny moments. But
That's
the point
brilliant.
was, yeah, the point was, he said, people are ambivalent. Nobody denied. Nobody denied. And one person at the end said, life's hard enough. Why don't we just accept it? They're there. And of course, there's an expression in Ireland, they're there all the same. It's sort of, you can damn them as much as you like, but they're there all the same. So there's a consciousness.
Yeah.
And I think that's very much fed by the landscape and the ancient monuments. And the truth is, nobody knows who built those monuments. People can guess till they're blue in the face, but nobody knows. They're massive feats.
Hmm.
Those monuments, the stone circles, massive stones. The tombs, the burial tombs, the burial cairns, the burial chambers. You know, we know bits and pieces from the oral tradition,
Right.
but we don't really know who built those things, you
Hmm.
know. And of course, the fairies became very much connected to that, so that they're under the hills, that like they're in the hills, they're under the hills, they're in the tombs, they're in the lisses, which are
Yeah.
forts.
Hmm.
And if going round Ireland, if you see a place name with she in it, it usually means that the she is the word for fairy. So it
Hmm.
usually means some sort of connection with fairy activity there at some stage.
Right.
So the landscape tells a lot and holds a lot. And I'm sure Anthony Murphy discussed this with you too.
Yes. It's a good thread back to that conversation. And so the she is spelled Sidhe, right?
Right. That's
Hmm.
the full spelling, but in more modern Irish, you just see it S-I with a what's called a fada shinta. It's
Hmm.
the little sort of accent over the I.
Hmm.
Um, and that's, you see that now as the she, like the ban she, Bean, not bean, but ban,
Ah,
S-I, fada, you know. Um, so yeah, so they're just sort of prevalent.
that is fantastic.
Yeah.
Now, a lot of times when we think about May Day, we think about maypoles. Were maypoles really a thing in Ireland, or was it more like I think
More
about
in England,
Morris
I would
dance?
say.
Yeah.
Yeah, I would say. But having said that, that little song that I began to sing, the Huggamore song,
Hmm.
and there are several verses to it. And there are two verses in that which are about the community coming together. It's like, oh, my brother, it's so long since I've seen you, and you're very welcome. No, my wife hasn't seen you either. And then the next verse is, she can sit in silver chair if she wants, or she can sit in the golden chair if she prefers that. Now, I've got these two verses from somebody in the Gaeltacht, the Irish area,
Oh.
I don't know, 20 to 25 years ago, maybe. I can't remember exactly
Hmm.
how I got these two verses, but I've never understood exactly what those references were, the silver chair and the golden chair. And my suspicion, and it's only my opinion, is that it was some kind of special ritual
Ah.
where it was something like the Queen of the May and the Princess of the May, something like that. I may be totally off there. I don't know.
Hmm.
Um, and so, I'm always one of the great things about, scholarly studies is you learn to be extremely humble and
That's right.
and always welcoming any real good information which is accurate. That's great,
Yes.
and I'll take that happily. So if anybody listening to this doesn't know that what that interpretation is,
Yeah.
um, I'd be interested to know. But
It's
to me, it sounds like that kind of thing, something about um, status and
mm,
being crowned. Because when you talk about silver and gold, you usually think of crownings and that type of
yeah.
thing. But maypoles, no, that's very, very much an English tradition.
hmm I think of the Morris dancers and things like that. And
Mm.
we were talking beforehand, and my time in Vermont, for instance, there are a lot of different kinds of rituals like that, and I think must have been something brought over from in the past, but also a modern thing as well. But a lot of earth-based types. Yeah, I think Mars dancers are kind of a big thing, especially in central Vermont. But it's fantastic. I am really enjoying the information you're sharing here, and I have been thinking about how I mean, quite a bit I know, of course, but it always feels like every time I have a conversation with somebody, there's always these new resources, new information, new aspects of things that I've heard about for years, but still, there's this wellspring that it just keeps bubbling up, and I think when I was writing my thesis at University of Limerick, and I stayed in Galway over the summer, I feel like I was so overwhelmed because I'm like, there's could be so much information I can put in here. I'm like, I'm not even scratching the surface here. Like, how can I even, So it's an amazing thing. It feels like limitless, which I think that's what it's all about. That sort of the endless circle, or that the tracery kind of patterning, and things like that. So bringing us back to so like University of Limerick days, and say your interest in sacred music. Yeah, I'm curious when you originally started singing, and also your interest in sacred music.
Well, when did I start singing? I think probably I was singing in the womb. I'm not sure. um, I have never not sung. I was raised in Northern Ireland, and basically I was a child of the Troubles, and
Mm,
that led up to the Troubles. So it was an incredibly tense time beforehand. It was just thick. The air was thick. I used to, as a child, when we would go over the border, because there was a border, then a land border with
mm,
Donegal, I'd close my eyes before we come up to it, and I would know when we crossed it. I'd feel it energetically,
mhm.
because there's a lightness there that wasn't where I was.
Ah,
So um, my early childhood, all my teenage years were through the Troubles. So my early childhood was sort of, it was the shadow beginning, well, the shadow that had never left since 1922, actually.
yeah.
Um, but I used to sing when I was scared. I used to sing as much as I could. I'd sing anything. And
Mhm.
I remember once singing along to the radios. My mother used to have a wireless, as she called it, going, and she was a nice singer. She would sing.
Ah,
I would sing a harmony to something. She would sort of say, "Well, why are you singing that? That's not the song." I said, "No, that's the other song that goes with it." I didn't even know what a harmony was.
that's the other song. I love
Other
that.
song that goes with it. And
Yeah.
that was the way I thought of it. And so, I mean, I remember, you know, to when I was extremely small, just singing, and singing just gave me joy, and singing always has given me joy. It is my joy, and I'm very
Mm,
lucky to have a very specific joy. I appreciate that. But ultimately, at times being a professional singer is a very difficult profession.
mm,
Any kind of an artist trying to make a living is very difficult. And there were times when I'd be very down about it. And then, I came to the conclusion that the singing wasn't so much about other people, it was about me, and about the thing that raised my spirit, and it raised my joy. And so when I did that, then that radiated out to other people. But that wasn't the main reason for it. The main reason for it was about getting me through life. you
yes.
know? So that's really where the singing, I think, comes from. the sacred stuff really comes from Latin Mass.
Mm.
When I
Yeah.
was a child, we still had the Latin Mass in Ireland, and I loved it. I would go into a state with it. I
Wow.
remember my first Holy Communion when I was 7, and it was all the Latin Mass, and they were singing it. And I was singing along. I didn't have a clue what they were singing because I didn't have any of the
Mm.
words, but I was singing along anyway. And then I went very sort of faint, and I was sort of dizzy, and I was beginning to go into an altered state, partly because I hadn't eaten all morning either, But I
Right.
began to experience that, and then they took the Latin Mass out, and
Mm.
I was terribly upset. I lost interest really because the Latin Mass for me was magical. The singing was magical. The chanting was magical. And then
Wow.
when I was about 17, I went to a place called Station Islands, or also called Patrick's Purgatory. I don't know if you've heard of it.
No,
Up
actually.
in
Wow.
Donegal, Pettigo. And it's a little island about 200, 300 yards from the mainland, where there's a massive basilica, massive cathedral. That's all that's on the island now.
Mm.
But it used to be a penal island. People would go there, as voluntarily, I think, to to sort of engage with the upper world.
Hmm.
And that's why it's called St. Patrick's Purgatory. Um, but we would certainly, when I was growing up, it was a place where it was almost like a rite of passage to go to
Mm.
that, and at some stage in your teenhood or your adulthood, your early adulthood. People would go for different reasons. Mine were totally and utterly selfish. I was coming up to my final exams in school, my A levels, and I really wanted to get away from the war that I was living in. And I saw that if I could go to London University, then I could get away, but I needed certain A levels. So that's why I went to St. Patrick's Purgatory to pray for my A levels. Well,
Oh,
I did get my A levels, not the ones I wanted, but I got enough to go to London. But that wasn't what I really got in St. Patrick's Purgatory. What I really got was an understanding of chant.
oh wow.
And yeah, and it was fairly amazing what happened to me, because the system there was you would start to fast on the Friday. It was
Hmm.
always at a weekend. You'd start to fast on the Friday. You wouldn't have anything from when you got up. You'd be taken up there. My dad drove me up there, and then you'd be taken on a boat across the island around about 3 o'clock. And then you would start the endless stations, as they called them, which were basically lots and lots of rosaries over and over and over and over again. But walking around, your shoes were taken from you, so you had to walk on cobbles, you had to walk on pebbles, you had to walk on shingle, different kinds of stones. So there's a bit of bodily torture, you know,
Wow.
with this and with the fasting. Um, you didn't get to eat for 24 hours, and then you didn't get to sleep. So that night they put everybody into the basilica. My theory was that people were beginning to be traumatized by hunger and by cold, and would probably have fallen off the side of the island because it wasn't very big.
Mm.
So anyway, they put you into this basilica, and all night long you'd walk around for 45 minutes reciting rosaries, and
Wow.
then you have a 15-minute break, and then off again all night. And you wouldn't get any food until the Saturday, and then that night you would get to sleep. You get one meal on the Saturday, which was very basic,
Hmm.
oatmeal, oat bread or something, and you
Yeah.
didn't get tea, just hot water. Um,
Wow.
and then on the Sunday you went home, and you had to stay fasting until the night. But um, when we were in that basilica, it's such a big memory. And I'm writing a book at the minute about the Keen, which is hopefully going to come out later this year. And
Yeah.
I record this in. I record a lot of memories in the book. But this was a pivotal moment for me. I remember walking around, and there were two women in front of me. And in those days as well, women would wear headscarves in
Hmm.
mass.
Yes.
Young people like myself didn't, but older people did.
Hmm.
And these two women were chanting the rosary.
Wow.
And I became totally enthralled by this. And I could feel myself moving up. Like I could
Mhm.
feel myself having an out of body experience, not knowing what it was.
Yeah.
And just sort of just this really strange feeling, but it was the same as I'd had in my first Holy Communion. And it was with chant. And when
Mm.
you add in the other stuff, the hunger and the physical punishment, then you began to understand a lot about what the early mystics had seen, because this was a practice for them,
Mhm.
the early Christian mystics. And so then they would go into the other world, they would go into an altered state, and they would have visions.
Mhm.
So it was just a huge epiphany for me at 17 to experience that. Um, and then, I went to London and I got lost in life in London for many, many years.
Mhm.
And then I came back to it in Buddhism,
Wow.
interestingly enough,
Wow.
and I began to study Buddhism, and I began to remember these things. And then
Mm.
um, another massive event for me was when my mother died when I was 40, and that was a massive event for me.
Wow.
And I really began to look into different things at that point, different religions, different ways of being in the world, and taking what I liked and what resonated with me, not necessarily what was easy, but
Mhm.
what resonated, and taking that and making my own spiritual path out of that. So all through that, the thing that kept jumping up was chant. I went through a period of Hindu chant,
Mhm.
uh, some years where I learned a lot of Hindu chant, and I would just do it. I love doing it in a group, like a kirtan group, or I love doing it
Yeah.
myself. It's just, um, and all sorts of religious chant. And then I went back to Latin chant.
Mhm. Ah,
That was
full
when,
circle.
went back to Latin chant, and that was when I was down at UL. Yeah, and
Mm.
I've made one of the albums I've made since then was called Sacred Days, Mythic Ways, and it took quite a few of those chants, those Latin chants, and changed them, did my other songs with them.
Right.
Did
Oh,
harmonic versions of them and stuff. So
that's so
that's sort of
beautiful.
my singing history. And nowadays I teach mostly. I haven't performed for some years.
Mhm.
I am considering doing another album when I finish the book. We'll see where we get to. But, I have great joy in teaching and in seeing other people light up when they find their own voice, and
Yeah.
I trained in voice as well. I did a vocal training, and then I also trained in shamanic studies, and I trained in sound healing. So I've had lots of different trainings,
Yes.
which have really helped me come to the place where I'm at now of whatever I understand.
That's beautiful. It's a beautiful thing to uh, I'm at a place where I can kind of see the oneness in so many spiritual traditions and this way of looking at things and um exploring different traditions. And it's not that we're trying to co-opt facets of other spiritual traditions. It's really to try to, I don't know, it would be nice to embrace the whole, right? And there's a kind of a holistic picture I gather from this. Is it that the same for you?
Absolutely. I mean, I remember my teacher, my Buddhist teacher. I was very privileged to have a lama called Sagya
Mm,
Rinpoche, who wrote the Tibetan book of the living and the dying,
yeah.
and his area was about death, which was very useful because I went on a 10-day retreat for my 40th birthday. That's what I did,
Wow.
a Buddhist retreat, and I learned a lot about death and dying. And then a year later, my mother died, and had I not been to that retreat, I wouldn't
Mm,
have known how to cope.
yeah.
So it was
Wow.
it was a wonderful gift for me. But I remember him at one stage. He had a great sense of humor. I remember him at one stage saying, you people in the West are really funny. He said, you think, oh, I'm going to study some Indian, tradition. So I better rush out and get lots of pictures of gods with lots of arms. He said, they're not your symbols. He said, you have your own symbols. He said, for me, I grew up with those kinds of symbols of those gods. You grew up with Marian symbols and with um, Judeo-Christian symbols. And he said, he leaned over and he said, do you really think that God and Buddha are going to fight about this? And I just thought, it just sort of summed it up really. And in that
Yeah.
moment, I thought, yeah, this is like whatever path you choose, um, it's your path.
Mhm.
It's the one that works for you. And and there can be all sorts of different mixtures going on in my belief system.
Yeah, I think that's what naturally happens when we're mixed, talking with other people and collaborating and just, especially if we're open-minded people and we're interested in, we're curious, and I think that's just a natural byproduct. And as we're speaking, I'm getting a picture of this like mountain almost with doorways on all different sides, and it's like we come in with our own thing, like our own kind of language around spirituality, and sometimes we do go back to it even if we're not intending to. And sometimes even we've rejected some of those images before, and then we kind of, at least this is where I'm at. I kind of come and re-embrace them, and it's kind of a beautiful thing. And I feel more kind of at peace and whole. So,
Yeah, yeah. I mean, with Christianity, I was fervent for the first 18, 19 years of my life.
hmm,
Um, and then I rejected it. And then, I studied these other religions. And then I've come back to it, but in a very different way.
right.
So, and things from the Christian Bible come back to me, things like in my father's house there are many mansions,
Hmm.
and all right, now I get it.
Yeah.
And I think it's taken me, for me, maturity to understand a lot of what I was, it was being drummed into me, but it didn't mean much when I
Hmm.
was younger. Um, so I think we can look to any religion and see extremely the tenets of any religion come down to a couple of basic things,
Right.
which are really about kindness and compassion and respect.
Yes.
And those are the main things. And if you practice that, you don't go too far wrong.
Hmm. I
That's what I
I
think.
agree. And that's exactly how I feel, that I see a unity with things, so that when I talk to somebody of different faith tradition. Now, I, I don't know if anybody who takes piano lessons with me and comes and finds my podcast. Well, you never know, they might. But I work with people from all different backgrounds, whether they're Hasidic Jews or LDS or Catholic or Protestant or pagan, and again all sorts of people, atheists, and I just feel like a unity with them. I can kind of understand where they're coming from and empathize. So I think it's a good place to be. As you said, and it can't go wrong. With compassion and kindness and curiosity about other people.
Yeah, openness,
Mm,
uh, and I think that I think that in every religion there are good people and not so good people.
yeah,
In every political setup's the same. It's humanity. Some people are opportunists. Some people are givers. Some people are takers. Some people are friendly. Some people are shy. I mean, we're all different, but
sure,
there are rough groupings, of
yeah,
traits, if you like. And that's the same through any religion. I think religion is often dictated by where you live, by
mm-hmm,
where you're born, the family that you're born into, the country that you're born into, and if there's a predominant religion within that, then
sure,
that's what you're going to be exposed to in your early days. Um,
yeah,
so I was born into Catholic Ireland. That's where
mm,
I was born, so that was the one that I was exposed to. But
right,
that doesn't take away from other religions, in my mind.
exactly.
Yeah, it's a
I
very
think,
interesting thing. But for me, the singing is the key. And I mean, I know that I've sung all sorts of songs from different religions. In fact,
yeah,
I was a special schools teacher for about 17 years in London.
oh,
And I remember, in England, there is I don't know if the law is still happening because there's a lot of controversy around it right now, but
hmm,
certainly in those days, in the 80s and 90s, it was, you had to do 15 minutes of worship every day,
ah,
but it didn't define what the worship was.
hmm,
So I remember the principal saying to me, well, you're the music teacher, so why don't you do the worship? Um, 15 minutes of singing every day. So I researched songs from every religion I could find, and
Wow.
each day we would have a different a different religious song, you
Way to
know.
do it. That is fantastic. I
Yeah.
love that.
Great fun, you know, and it was like for me just really mind expanding to do that. But yeah, as much as I could, and any feast that came along, you know,
Yeah.
I would make some sort of fuss about that, you know. So I guess I've always, without even realizing it, been hanging on to ritual, which they say is very Catholic,
Yeah.
without even realizing it. That's what I was doing, you know, and making form out of my own life
Mhm.
while trying to help others make form out of theirs, really.
That's right. That's beautiful. And now, with Catholicism, we were talking about rejection and things. What I found, especially, it was like right when got confirmed, basically, I discovered their view on homosexuality, and also realizing that the female voice was not exactly there at the forefront, and it really hurt. It hurt to be. It's like, how can I be a part of this anymore? That's how I felt. So I feel like this, kind of Irish spirituality seems to be more inclusive of so many divergent viewpoints and different spiritualities, like going to the Solus Breed Center, and being able to have the sisters welcome us. Anthony Murphy and I were talking about this as well. Just, that they're so inclusive. And is that something that you found, sort of a rejection, and then just kind of a
I would say that's something that's much more. Well, look, I mean, I went to a convent school, you
yes.
know, and for the most part, the nuns were cruel. For the most part, they weren't nice people,
Mm-hmm.
but there were a couple who were so lovely. I remember one in particular, Mother Kevin, and she was elderly. I mean, well, I was, you know, a child, 11, 12. Maybe she was in her 50s, but she seemed
Yes.
elderly to me. Maybe she was a little older. But she would take us for religious class on on a Friday, and it was always the same. She'd ask us 10 questions. She'd give us the answers, and then she'd give us all a sweet for getting it right. You know, I mean, it was like she was like this balm, this oasis in this
Oh.
very difficult place, you know.
Mm-hmm.
Um, my experience of Catholicism wasn't that it was kind at all, but there were certain people within it
Sure.
who I resonated with, who were really kind, and they were just like these hosts, you know, along the way. But mostly it was scary, you
Mm-hmm.
know, like it was all equal opportunities. We were all going to hell, you know, it was that sort of a thing. It was really scary. I
Yes.
spent a lot of my childhood being terrified. I don't know who I was more terrified of, the political situation or or the school situation, you
Yeah.
know. So I mean, my own experience of it wasn't great, but I found the things that made sense for me, the singing, the chanting,
Mm-hmm.
the Latin, those made sense for me, and I hung on to those. Um, and I think that when I rejected it, I think it was very much about being in London, being in a multicultural society for the first time.
Hmm.
As, the Ireland that I grew up on was very white, and there were very few people who weren't white. And anybody who wasn't white or Irish were greeted like some sort of a curiosity, and were welcomed, very welcomed, because it was exotic, it was unusual. But going to London was totally multicultural.
Mm-hmm.
So I think I had this moment when I was 18, where I decided one day I wasn't going to go to mass, and I said I was going to be rebellious and not going to mass on Sunday.
Yeah.
And then I suddenly realized nobody cared. Nobody knew and nobody cared. And I felt like my identity had been stripped from me. It was a very traumatic moment. Uh, I was really scared. I didn't know who I was anymore. And so I think from that place, I began to then build my more inner identity, who I actually was, you know, touched in with that. So,
Hmm.
and that did not include Catholicism or the oppression. that I had
Yes.
experienced personally. Now, I don't mean to sound completely damning of Catholicism at all, because it really is about the people who administered that,
Mm-hmm.
you know, rather than the actual religion itself. It was the way that it was, and of course, all that has come out in the wash over the last 20 years,
Yes.
awfully badly. It
Mm-hmm.
was twisted around terribly badly. And of course, I was picking all that up, so without realizing that that's what I was picking up. But um, I would say no, I don't do regular practice. I mean, I do meditation. That's the most practice that I do is meditation. Um, but I really enjoy, again, the feast. I enjoy going to church. And I don't care if it's an Anglican church or a Catholic church or anything. If they're singing carols, I'm going,
Yeah.
that sort of a thing. So
They're
again,
singing
it's
some good stuff. I'm going to be there. Yeah.
about the music. So the music is the piece for me that's always drawn me in for other
It's
people.
amazing that it's just a tremendous, oppression and trauma that has, been inflicted with the political situation, as you were talking about, the religion, and even though I kind of painted it at first with like a rosy tinge, it's really important to see what it has been, for so long, for so many people, and that we can kind of grow from this. It's interesting. We have sort of parallel kind of stories here where we've felt really, and I've been reflecting about it a lot. It's been over 20 years or so where that has happened. It's sort of like this shattered picture of, but I do value that, just this ritual, just celebrating holidays. I almost don't care which ones they are, celebrating holidays, if it's Saints Feast Day, or just the beauty in ritual practices, is a beautiful thing. And it's amazing how, we can still grow and not be traumatized anymore. We can grow from that and heal. A healing
Yeah,
balm, as you're mentioning.
yeah. I wrote a song called Silhouettes at the end
Mm.
of the 80s, and it was about the Northern Ireland Troubles. And
Ah.
it was about how we'd more in common with each other if we could only see it. And
Mm-hmm.
so we were just shadows, really,
Ah.
because uh, it was segregated. It was a segregated country. It was a segregated life, and each side demonized the other. And
Mm-hmm.
so I wrote this song about it, and I recorded it in my first album in 1991. And I got a cello player in who was from Belfast. I was recording in London, and a lovely, lovely woman called Sherry. And
Mm.
I'd met her, and she was a beautiful cellist. And I asked her to come and play in this song. And on the song, all we have is my voice, uh, a drone, which I did on the keyboard, and her cello. Very stripped down song.
Wow.
And when we finished it, I came out, and the producer just looked at us both and said, "I'm not touching that. I'm not touching it." And we sat and listened to it. And as we listened to it, we grabbed each other's hands and started to cry.
Oh,
We just
wow.
wept. And, and she said, she'd been raised Protestant, I'd been raised Catholic. We'd been taught to demonize each other. And she wasn't allowed to uh, experience the tradition that I was allowed to experience. I didn't understand the tradition that she had experienced, and we just wept, and it was a phenomenally emotional moment. Um, and I'm just about to re-release that album actually on Bandcamp,
Mm.
because it sort of got buried and everywhere. So I'm just about to re-release it, and that song's called Silhouettes, and it's literally about that stuff, about how two people who are so alike,
Yes.
can actually be so separate.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that was another huge moment for me. Probably one of the most profound moments during my recording,
Mm-hmm.
certainly of that album. I mean, every album I've recorded, there's been profound moments.
Yeah.
but during that one, it was like that moment
That's
where, yeah, you
that's
know,
beautiful and coming together and this, decades now later and there's so much healing that's been done. I know that it's not exactly perfect, but I kind of sensed I went up to Belfast. It was 2017. I went on, it was a day trip, like a bus errand kind of a situation or on the train or whatever it was. Yeah, bus errand. Yeah, I went to Belfast on the Black Taxi tour, and it
all
was
right.
a damp, cold, rainy day. Like it was just as it's gonna be up there, but and just we heard the history and saw the murals, and I mean I felt like I I was going to be sick. Like I was like I need to get out of here. you know I just felt like chilled to the bone, and I was just sort of like almost afraid, and I was like I gotta get it. This is I could just feel it in the place.
Oh,
So
the energy is still there.
the energy's still
The
there.
energy has lessened, but
Mm-hmm.
it's still there. I mean, it was a 30-year war.
Yeah.
I mean, you're not going to have a 30-year war and the very imprint of it not be there. Of course it's
Right.
there, and so it's 25 years now. It's lessened, but it's always under the surface. You're aware of it.
Yeah.
It's there, but it's nowhere near. And I'm
Mm-hmm.
really glad to see, a generation that's growing up that hasn't had to face that,
Right.
and they think differently,
I'm so glad. Yeah.
which is
That,
good. So it's all beginning, but it's fragile. It's fragile,
right.
you
And
know.
I feel like sometimes the newer generations sometimes have to go back and kind of put back the pieces, or kind of they they almost discover it in a different way in their own time, which is interesting. I do a lot of ancestry work, family research, and I still have to dig more deeply into the one side. I do a lot with the Italian side, and then there's the Polish, but there is the Irish and English. And so, like, different family members have different roots in Ireland and England, even Northern Ireland too. I need to, kind of touch base. I know that there are some about a half hour outside of Belfast. So it's interesting because I was so interested in St. Bridget, and so drawn into her story for a variety of different reasons, and also a lot of synchronicities and things, and all these things kind of. When I look at the ancestry, it's like, well, no wonder, it's funny. I was really raised more like an Italian American kind of a background, and I didn't hear much about my Irish side or English. I heard a little bit, but not so much, and going back and going, oh wow, no wonder. And then I see apparently there's an ancestor of mine that apparently her name was Bridget Kennedy or Biddy Kennedy, and she was born in Kildare or got married in Kildare. So it's like, oh, no wonder I'm drawn to Kildare and St. Bridget. And
Yeah, exactly.
isn't it interesting, And
And the other big trauma in Ireland as a whole was the famine, the
mhm,
Gortamore, the big famine in the
yeah.
1840s. That was oh, I was shocked. I did a bit of ancestral work recently. I was shocked to
Mm,
discover that my great grandfather was 10 years of age when that happened.
wow.
I'm
Yeah.
only two generations away.
Mm-hmm.
And it's only now that people are beginning to be able to talk about it.
Yeah.
It's been such an incredible scar on the psyches. And one of the ways that it comes out is the need for land, the
Mm,
safety of your own house, rather than renting because of what happened. That people
yeah.
were just really turfed out, and so there are these things that you don't even realize. I mean, like I have a niece who lives in Germany. They all rent. They don't need to own. They're not interested in owning. But in Ireland, it's an ambition. You have to own because if you
Mm,
own your land, if you own your land, you've got safety. You
mm-hmm.
aren't at the mercy of somebody who will suddenly throw you out into the road.
Yes.
And that all came from the famine.
Mm-hmm.
So there are things like this, the things that we take for granted about a country, that there's a reason for it quite
Mm-hmm.
often. you know
Exactly.
that there's some sort of bonding in a certain way
Right.
psychologically because of some
Yeah.
massive trauma that's happened at some stage.
Exactly. It
And it
it
does take generations before people even begin to look at it.
it is fantastic and fascinating. And I've really had a great time talking to you today. One thing that I a little anecdote that whenever, I was getting into the Bridget songs, and when I went to Ireland and I visited the Solace Breed Center originally, that was 2008. they the sisters played some Bridget songs for me, and I went back, and at that time I was into iTunes, so I was like downloading everybody's, Bridget songs and all the things. And I believe I downloaded yours, and I hadn't even realized it was you until like maybe after we were at UL together. I'm like, wait a minute, that's Mary on there. I've been listening to that for years. Sometimes we listen to music and we don't, quite know who's
That's
on there.
Crystal Shoes and the album Crystal Shoe.
Oh, beautiful.
But what I'm
Yeah.
doing is re-releasing my albums on Bandcamp now.
Oh.
I did the Gaelic Christmas one. We're working now. We're going to be putting the Daughter of Lear one, that one
Mm,
up very soon because I work with somebody who helps me with little promotional video and stuff. And then I'm going to be putting up the Crystal Shoe. I'm going to be putting up Sacred Days and Mythic Ways. I can't do Celtic Requiem because I don't own it, because
okay.
Sony owns that one, and so
Oh.
I can't actually do it. Yeah, we did it for Windham Hill, which were bought up by Sony.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so so because of that, no, it sounds very grand, but believe me, it's not.
Yeah. Oh.
But the ones I own, I'm putting up because I actually got to the place where I get have become quite um, cross, really, with the internet, where my music's put up for free to play, and I'm thinking that cost me an enormous amount of money to me. I've never recouped my own costs. And I
Right.
just thought, because I make polished albums, with lots of
Mm-hmm.
musicians, and you have to pay people.
Right.
And so, you know, I've never actually recouped. And I just thought, I'm really fed up with this. I actually want to make some money to at least get back what I put in,
Yeah.
So that's why I'm putting all my albums up on Bandcamp and trying
Mm-hmm.
to point people towards that rather
Yeah.
than Spotify. You know?
Exactly.
So,
Now, are there any other Bridget songs that are on your albums?
no,
No,
sorry.
just the yeah, is the that
But I did
going
find
Malta
a
Bridget.
wonderful poem, a very old
Oh.
poem, Bridgebua or something. I have
Hmm.
it somewhere, and I was thinking of setting that to music at some stage. I haven't done
Oh,
it yet. So,
beautiful.
but
How did you hear
yeah,
about it?
this was, gosh, about, I think it was when the internet was fairly new, and
Mm-hmm.
I think I was in search, and somebody put up this old poem,
Oh, wow.
Buddha, I think it's called
Oh,
Bridge Buddha,
interesting.
and it's yeah, I know that I've, at least I hope I've kept the summer. I've changed computers a few times, as you do,
Yeah.
but I hope that I've still got it. I think I do. Um, and it's always been in my mind to sort of do something with that. I just haven't. Um,
Yeah.
but no, I haven't. I haven't come across the Bridget. So I mean, there aren't many that I've come across, except for the Gold Bridge, which is the one you heard,
Oh, yes.
and which
That
I
one's a
love.
popular one. Yeah.
I teach a lot, and I just love that song. Um, there just aren't that many, or ones that I've heard that are more modern. They don't resonate so well for me. I like the
Sure.
older songs. Uh, you know.
If anybody asks you, like, where did Go Malta Bridget come from? What do you usually say?
Oh, Go Moltebrija. Well, my understanding about it is that the tune is based on a 13th century plain chant
Mm-hmm.
called was to Mary,
Mm-hmm.
and it was oh, uh, Ave Stella Maris, Ave Stella
Yeah.
Maris. Based on that,
Mm-hmm.
the words were probably created in the 16 or 1700s,
Okay.
because the Irish would go to the masses and they would hear Latin and they would love the tunes, but they didn't speak Latin. So they
Mm-hmm.
would take some songs, so it's happened to quite a few, and then put Irish lyrics to it. And because they knew it was to Mary, they decided to do it to Bridget, who was Mary of the Gaels. So,
That's it.
so that's my understanding of it. What's yours?
Yeah. That's interesting. Yeah. It's interesting. Like, I think if I look online, people have different stories, but there is that connection with, the early medieval plain chant in Latin. Um, And funny enough, because I look up Ave Mari Stella, and I hear the tune, and I'm like, that doesn't sound like the Go Malta Regia. I was always confused about that, and I kind of put that to the side. But I was on this. I was watching a video, documentary. Sorry, documentary. It was on this road that there's Rome in the center. It's this highway that circles Rome, and
Yes.
they did little vignettes about the life and people living their regular lives, who live around that. And there's a one portion where you couldn't really see what was exactly going on. You could see sort of abstract, people singing in sort of a ritualized way, maybe. And they were singing Ave Maria still with that tune.
Not you.
And
Oh,
I was
now
like,
that's
wow.
fascinating.
Yes. So I was like, wow, this is just fantastic. And so I kind of went around, like, I was asking some of my Italian, family. I was like, do you know what this is? Like, do you know what they're singing? Because I wanted to make sure it was Ave Maria Stella and not maybe different words or something. I'm like, is it in Latin? It's definitely in Latin, right? Okay. And then I went on Facebook, and somebody in a Gregorian chant group told me what it was and gave me the link to it. But I like finally knew after all this time, where it came
Yeah.
from. But it seems like there was some editions of Irish songs, or even little pamphlet books of songs, Irish songs, um, at the beginning of the 1900s that people put out. And sometimes those people are attributed to creating the English lyrics, but it's like we not sure exactly who and when,
Yeah.
the English slang.
The Irish lyrics. No, I mean, like got it from.
Yeah.
Uh, I've had it actually from some of the scholars
Yeah.
that it's 16 or 1700s.
Right. Mm-hmm.
That's the time, and possibly a cleric, but not
Mm.
necessarily a cleric.
Okay.
Um,
During that time. That's
yeah,
interesting. Yeah.
or likely to have been just the people, probably a woman, might have been a nun, who knows?
Yeah.
But it's in praise of Bridget because it's an interesting little song because the first verse is, just, in praise of Bridget, and um, how wonderful she is and how people love her. And then the second song, or the second verse is uh, uh, yeah, just describes where she is from Limerick, or not Limerick,
Uh,
from Kildare.
Yeah, she's
Local,
in Leinster, like she's like
Leinster, big part. Yeah.
it's really, really interesting. And it links to this academic article that was written probably 20 years ago, and really breaks down like, so sorry, I lost my train of thought there. It really breaks down like the fact that maybe Bridget, her story, and the monk who wrote down the lives of the stories, she was almost like a mascot for Leinster, like she was
Yeah.
kind of a political there's sort of a political situation there where they're trying to kind of like promote that area or something, or maybe there's more to it than that, and I'd have to
Oh, what
really get
always
into.
fascinates me though is the third verse because that is more about the goddess.
Ah, yeah.
Because it's when this when the spring is coming, um this or when Bridget is near us, oh, I can't remember in English how to say it. The spring is near us when
Yes.
on Bridget's day, and that's very much about the goddess Bridget and the idea of you know the goddess Bridget coming in and laying her green mantle on the ground after the Cailleach has had her white coat all over the ground. So
Yeah.
it's very, very much about that. So I think that's one of the reasons I like that song because it goes from the sort of the religious piece into that middle bit about Kildare, and the goddess was also attached to Kildare, and
Yeah.
then the third bit more about the goddess. So I think it does this lovely little journey,
Yeah.
in terms of the
It,
words.
it's like they hit all the facets of it.
I do, yeah.
It's pretty amazing.
Right.
Here's one translation, because I noticed there's a number of different
Oh,
translations
really?
for it. Um,
Mm-mm.
oh, I give praise to Bridget, daughter of Ireland, daughter of all lands. Let us praise her. The bright torch of Leinster shining across the country, the leader of Ireland's youth, leader of gentle women. The house of winter is dark, cutting with its sharpness, but on Bridget's day, spring in Ireland draws near to us. I give praise to Bridget, daughter of Ireland, daughter of all lands. Let us praise her. So, like, they're directly praising her, which is interesting. This is from
Yeah.
Songs of the Isle, songoftheisles.com.
This this
That.
is here's a literal. I've got the Irish words in front of me. Literally,
Cool.
what it means is,
Yes,
I
let's
give
hear it.
praise to Gomalt to Bridget. I give praise to Bridget. Anwan Ela Heron, beloved of Ireland. She's beloved of Ireland. Anwan Lagok Chiri, she's beloved of every land. Malamish Kaleri, all of us give praise to Bridget, to her. Lochran Galna Lanya, bright light of Leinster. Sulci Fiona Chira, burning out through the land. Cean or Ogverin, the head of the youth of Ireland, Cean na man Armina, head of the women for her gentleness. Chicken Givruji and the dark severe winter comes. Giaru Lenayera, cutting with its sharpness. Acherlala Bridja, but on St. Bridget's Day, Gardu in Yarach Erin, the Irish spring is close to us.
Oh, lovely.
And so, it really does move through those three stages, you know?
Yeah.
So you don't know quite who she's giving praise to.
Yeah, exactly. It's
my,
real.
my instinct is that a woman wrote this.
Huh?
It's just in my instinct about it,
Mm-hmm.
that this feels very feminine somehow,
Right.
um, and sort of acknowledging the
Mm-hmm.
femininity side of it, the feminine principle. And
Right.
Bridget is and has been the feminine principle in Ireland. When I was learning Irish when I was a child,
Mm.
um, we learned how to greet each other. Now it was much different than the way it is now. Now it's just hi, same as everybody hi.
Oh, yeah.
The greeting, you didn't, when you greeted somebody, you used to say Diogach, which means God be with you. But the response was Dias Muragach, God and Mary be with you. And then if somebody else came into the conversation, it would be Dias Muras Padragach, God, Mary, and Patrick be with you. If a fourth person came in, it was Dias Muras Padragach Bridgigach. Mary, Patrick, and Bridget with you. And the litany went down to about 11 people.
Wow.
They had little to do, they had no electricity. They were sitting in the in the dark, so they greeted each other endlessly.
That's amazing.
But that's a very, very old traditional sort of blessing greeting.
Yeah.
But it was very interesting that was the hierarchy. God, Mary, Patrick, Bridget, and then I think there's Colum Kill under that, and then Columba under that. I can't remember them all,
Probably
but
Brendan's in there somewhere too.
probably, yeah, I can't remember them all. But it's very interesting that they're totally balanced at the top of these four: male, female, male, female.
Wow. It's
Whereas
neat.
the
I
rest
mean,
of
I've
it
heard
is a
about that before, but it's neat to hear it again. As these traditions
yeah,
described by different people. It's wonderful. Ah, Mary, thank you so much for being here with us today.
my
And I'm going to
pleasure.
try to get this podcast out within the next couple days, hopefully. Um, and I hopefully will send out that information about your class so people could probably sign up before time. So,
Yeah.
yeah.
Okay. Well, I probably missed this class, but
All right.
there'll be other classes.
So there
You
will be
know,
other
the
classes.
main thing
Okay.
is to get on the newsletter. Then you get the notification
Ah,
of
okay.
when there will be other classes.
You find that it's pretty booked right now, your class?
This one's very booked. Yeah,
Okay.
this is a very full class.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Oh, you're gonna have
So
such a blast.
yeah, so it's going to be interesting to do it. Yeah. But I mean all the classes are fairly full, but
Mm-hmm.
but I do a recorded option as well, so people can, if you can't make the class because of the time change, I'm in a very different
Yes.
time zone.
Mm-hmm.
And so because of that, then people can do it in their own time. And I personally, if I'm taking a class, I will do it recorded because I can't guarantee that I'll always be available at a certain time,
That's right.
So,
Yeah. That's
uh,
another thing.
so it's just another option. Anyway, it's been
Exactly.
delightful to see you again and have this
Yeah.
conversation. And
Yeah,
We
it's
covered a lot of
fantastic.
ground.
We did. Thank you. And this is the first time I really went off. I definitely touched a lot of the questions that I had prepared, but I kind of meandered around, and I think that's what needed to be said right now. I think that's perfect. The way that it flowed today.
Thank you for
So
inviting me, and
thank you very
I look
much.
forward to hearing it. And we'll keep in touch.
Yes.